I must say, I smiled when I was listening to Anuj, not because it was funny, I hasten to add Anuj, by the way. My firm, Moelis, which I'm a partner of, is a classic example of raise money when the markets are open. Ken raised 1.2 billion to start our firm, and it closed 3 days before Lehman went down. So imagine that was a week late. We wouldn't be here. I'll give you 2 minutes, if I may, on our firm. It's a global partnership. We do M&A, we do equity advice, debt advice, and restructuring. Very simple. We don't trade, we don't lend money. We just advise people. Large deals like the Anheuser-Busch InBev deal. We're doing the SAB Miller deal at the moment. Advised Yahoo on its defence, that sort of thing. I recently closed the Samsonite IPO in Hong Kong. Happily, other people seem to think we're doing a decent job. We've won a number of awards, but that's enough of the advert. I'll stop on that. I'm going to address 5 questions, dealing with one of the ones that John referred to earlier. How is the world going to change? 2050 isn't a sort of time we should focus on, but just over a reasonably long period. Who's driving that change? So what's making that happen? And then what's the West looking for from companies from the East generally, and vice versa? What is the East looking for from the West, and kind of how does that affect things? I always find this chart very, very interesting. It's very easy to look at things like GDP charts and seeing that China is growing at 7 or 8%, and India is growing at 8 or 9%, and the UK is growing at 20%. Not. If you just apply the maths to that for a little bit, China will be 60 trillion GDP or so, by then. And China and India are very clearly going to be significantly the biggest economies in the world. This shouldn't be a surprise to us, frankly. If you look at some rather longer-term data, if you take the last sort of 1,000 years or so, China has been 25% of world GDP for most of the last 1,000 years. I don't know how they measure that, but that's what the economists said. But the point is, we're seeing a big shift. If you look at this, the top, of these top, I'm going to press the wrong button there, of the top sort of 4 or 5, it's broadly, other than the US, it's Asian. And so, answering John's question, will the flight to quality turn to people extracting investments from the West and retreating to the East in 10 or 20 years' time? Could easily be the case. What's driving this? It's one very, very simple thing, basically. If you look at how the middle class is going to grow in Asia, middle class might not be your or my definition of middle class, but in an economist context, it's those earning between $2 and $20 a day. And that doesn't sound like an awful lot, but in terms of the expenditure that creates with a billion people here or there, it has a very, very dramatic impact. If you look at that in developing Asia, so I mean, this is driven by India and China, frankly. It's gone up by a factor of 3 over the course of the last 20 years, and it's expected to double again over the course of the next five years. This middle class also has a very strong savings mentality. So, when John was setting the scene, talking about the government expenditure, government debt, and the levels of debt within the consumer population, this group are people who are inclined to save money, and they're just starting slowly to spend. And in the meantime, the governments aren't heavily indebted and have spending much more under control. Let's contrast that with the Western world a little bit. This is looking at the US, a more US definition of middle class, I hasten to add. The left-hand chart shows income disparity, or the difference between the rich and the poor. Very simple message here, it's getting worse. So the rich are getting richer, and the poorer are getting poorer. And then if you look at the middle class in the middle, what's happened to the expenditure availability of the middle class in the US? It's actually worse than it was in 2000. And particularly has dropped, by a good chunk in the last couple of years. So, we're not just experiencing, governmental economic slowdown. The actual, ability of the middle class, which is where the vast majority of expenditure comes from, has been very severely squeezed over the course of the last couple of years. And what are then Western's companies looking for then, if they're going to the East? Well, look, first thing, very simple. It's demand. So if you take Daimler, BMW, and Audi, for each of those car companies, and I've advised all 3 of them, over half of their profits are now driven by China. It's quite a thought, isn't it? China is the largest car market in the world. Not Europe, not America. China. And the the expenditure on cars is broadly 5 times, the propensity to spend on cars is 5 times that of the Americans. So when you're a car company, you're sitting thinking, where am I going to invest right now? China's a hell of a good place because there are a lot of them. They're spending far more on cars than Americans tend to. And the people who are capable of spending that money are growing at a very, very high rate. I pick car companies because I do a lot of stuff in the car industry, but I could equally have picked Carrefour in the consumer industry, any of the beverage companies who are busy buying companies over there, etc. If you contrast that, however, I picked Vodafone because it's sort of the most global of the telecoms companies. You look at their 2010 revenues, broadly everywhere was down except Asia. So what are they looking for here then? It's very simple, it's demand. John was talking about FDI flows earlier on. The reason why there are such strong FDI flows going into the Asian region is because of where the demand growth is coming from. People want to build factories there. They want to get hold of that demand. Second thing, obviously, they're looking for, particularly the car guys. I'm sure you've heard about the whole offshoring thing, and the same with a lot of consumer industries. Originally, they were looking for low-cost labour and for lowering their cost of production. That's helped inflation here in Europe very considerably. But actually now, it is no longer cheaper, bizarrely, to build a car in China than it is to build it in Hungary, for example. For a whole raft of reasons I won't go through, but it's probably fractionally more expensive to build out there than it is to build here. As I said, I won't go through the reasons for it. But then you ask, so why are they building them there rather than here? Convenience and regulation. Obviously, if you build a car in China and that's your big market, it's a lot easier than building it here and shipping it out there. And regulatory tax, I suppose, more than regulation. Quite a lot of markets, China's certainly one of them, India's another one. If you don't build the cars there, you can't sell them there, or you can, but you get penalised very heavily from a tax point of view. So the two key drivers really there, I guess, demand and originally cost, but now convenience of accessing that demand. If we then turn to what are Western companies looking for, I bet if I'd done a straw poll, and I probably should have done that beforehand, people would have expected it was going to be capital. The East is looking for capital. And actually, the bizarre thing is it's the West that's looking for capital. If you look at where are the big IPOs happening at the moment, I just literally, we're in the middle of it, I suppose, but the Samsung IPO listing happened about a month ago, tranche 2 and so on are coming up. Glencore Hong Kong, Rusal Hong Kong. These are 3 of the 5 biggest IPOs this year, basically. And you look at what's been speculated. Well, sorry, Lostane's happened, Prada's happened, but the speculation about where are the big IPOs coming. You go and talk to Marchioni at Fiat. Where's he going to list Ferrari? He's not even thinking about New York or London. You go and talk to the Aston Martin guys if they're thinking of listing. It's going to be in the East. That's where the growth is. And why do they do that? It's very simple. There's the savings perspective there. There is the understanding of growth. They are prepared to pay for that growth because they believe in it. And that's what's leading to people for searching for capital there. Plus, there is lots of capital available there. And then finally, I was last, so I thought I'd keep it very short. What is the East looking for from the West? Again, you can simplify this, and I've tried to simplify a very complex subject into simple themes. China, in the last 7 years, has spent 146 billion buying resources outside China. And what are they buying? 2 main broad aspects. Biggest one is natural resources. China has about 25 or 30% of the world's population and about 8% of the world's resources. They have to buy iron ore, coal, etc., etc., etc. And that's what this large block here represents. Most of that is being bought in these 2 regions in Australasia and Africa. And I don't know how many of you been to Africa recently, but the place is crawling with smiling. It's crawling with Chinese people building things, buying things, digging things, etc., etc. The investment there is quite amazing. Second area is primarily around industrials. In fact, it's slightly biased the way the charts come out here, and that's almost all spent in Europe and America. They want to buy technology. They want to buy brands, because they can then re-import them back to their local markets and use them. I advise Geely on buying Volvo, for example. They're going to double the size of that broadly over the next couple of years, taking Volvo back to China. I advise Tata on buying Chorus. There are a whole raft of reasons around that. Tata on buying Jaguar Land Rover, which has flourished ever since. Bizarrely, actually, they haven't taken it back to India yet, which is sort of slightly odd. But it's buying these brands and the technology they can then use, and then use in their local markets that they're really after. So if I sort of summarise all that, and I realise I've been very, very brief. Like I said, if I'd asked a straw poll, what do people think, where these flows are going to be, I'd be very surprised if people had summarised it like this. The West is really looking for demand and markets, and that's why the FDI is heading that direction. Point one. And point two, capital. Again, if you think for a second, who are we relying on at the moment to bail out the Eurozone in terms of spending their foreign reserves? China. And there was a great article in the FT, he who pays the piper will play the tune. Choose the tune. I think we're going to see that happening fairly strongly over the course of the next little bit. What is the East looking for? Resources, natural resources and technology, and interestingly, increasingly, homes for investment. The problem with so much saving and so much in the way of foreign reserves is you've got to put it somewhere eventually. And that's increasingly what the East is looking for out of the West.